Namaste everybody, Bruce here from rootsoflife.org, and in this video I'm going to marry two very important topics: your practice and how to meet your practice with a trauma-informed approach. This is super important because as we are moving into wellness and holding that space for others, it is unfortunately ripe with people, I'm sure you can agree, and I'm sure you've seen this, with people who are interjecting into the healing journey of other people. So we have to remember to be trauma-informed as we move to hold space, not only just for others, but for ourselves, right? As we even hold space for ourselves, we have to hold that from a trauma-informed perspective, right? So what does that mean? What does that look like? Well, let me tell you what, in my opinion, it doesn't look like, right? And this is, again, please think about your own journey and think about the people that you've worked with, right? Because I bet this is going to resonate. And actually, before I say what I think it would look like, let me actually give you an example of how it impacted me and how I started to go into a trauma-informed discussion with my own practices, right? So if you've been to rootsoflife.org and you've looked at my backstory, you might have seen that I'm a cancer survivor. And you know, when I was diagnosed with cancer, it brought to the head a lot of health anxiety. Now, prior to that, I was suffering with a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety as well. And at that time, of course, you know, I was still practicing Reiki. I was working on myself all the time. I hadn't really moved full time into my Reiki practice, but I was definitely using it as a healing modality. And so obviously I was seeking out a lot of Reiki healers as well. And so many of them, imagine me sitting there steeped in anxiety, like literally anxiety is like choking me because I'm going through all these health scares and all that type of stuff. I had so many people say things like, oh yeah, during that session, you know, I could feel this thing like a lump inside of your body, but I moved it. I got rid of it for you. Or I saw this angel and, you know, they told me to tell you that, you know, there's this thing that we really need to open up and work on because I was able to see it and so on. Cool. Okay. What does that do, right? Well, if you look at my previous video about the cords of belief and how that creates all of our suffering, bring that idea here for a moment and imagine me on the table coming out of a session with a Reiki healer who tells me that they just felt something in my body. Guess what happens? I'm right back in the world of belief and all of my suffering is just piling on me like an avalanche. Cool, so I just paid somebody to end up worse off than I was at the beginning of the session, right? So think about how many times, and I hear this all the time, teachers, practitioners, healers, all of these people who are more than happy to give you belief, give you hope, right? Give you story, interpret, all of that stuff that we do. But remember this, I am healing myself. That's it. You're healing yourself. That's it. The purpose of the individual should be to hold space and to hold space from a neutral perspective, right? And it's interesting, I think, that in the West, we have to have this type of a conversation. Now, I'm being very general here as I say the West versus the East, but just hear me out. See what I mean here by this. What I love so much about Usui Reiki Ryoho, the practice of Japanese Reiki, is that it's simply holding space, right? You place your hands on yourself or on the person, and you simply let go. That's it. That's it. There's no discussion, no interpretation, no channeling angels, no talking to Buddhas, no talking about the symbols, no interpreting the symbols, no opening chakras or moving energy or untying knots or psychic surgery or blah, 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 blah. None of this stuff happens. We simply hold space. That's it, right? And now if we go to a Western approach, it's much more doing, it's much more engaged. There's much more story, right? There's much more belief. And I fail to see how any single practice that is based in belief doesn't lead to trauma or to suffering, right? And so that's what I mean with this whole video, a trauma-informed approach to our Reiki practice or to your wellness practice is holding space, right? Okay, so what does that mean? What does that look like? When somebody comes out of a session, you know, I'm obviously understanding and sympathetic with people who would like to have, a discussion about their session and so on. The extent to which I do that, now ideally there would be no discussion. The session would be over and we would just be finished with Reiki. Now, in a professional setting, like when I'm working, in Hong Kong at the medical clinic that I work at, or when I'm working online via rootsoflife.org, sometimes people need to have a discussion afterwards, and there's nothing wrong with that at all, as long as it remains trauma informed, right? And we can start that conversation at the very beginning of our practice by just discussing how Reiki is going to work, or how it works, right? And how you will be holding space for your client. How Reiki can do no harm. It's simply the energy of all things. And as you are holding space for your client, you will simply be there as a placeholder, right? So the way I explain that to new clients is, imagine that I'm just walking behind you with a blindfold. So I'm not paying attention to where you're going. I'm not even encouraged to understand where you're going, because you're on your journey of healing. However, my hands are right behind you. So if you find one step to be too difficult, it's as if you can just rest in the neutrality of me holding space, right? Now, how do I keep that neutral? How do I keep that neutral? Go back and watch my video on belief. And that's where I talk about the internal journey, right? Which I will link here above right now. Now, what we do then, as we are explaining Reiki from this perspective, you see it encourages people to recognize that they are safe, they're in a safe environment, and they are in a practice that is going to be free of judgment or belief or any of the kind of negative pathways that could lead to a trauma discussion, or to a discussion that's going to elicit trauma, right? So they simply lay down, they surrender, they let go, and the session is going to be amazing, because Reiki is amazing. When you just do Reiki neutrally, you get off the table and it's like, oh my God, what a breath of fresh air. It was so wonderful to have that space. Now comes the post-session discussion. How do we hold that space so that we can stay trauma-informed, yet also help the client understand what they experienced? Well, to me, it's very simple. And I'd encourage you to think about this with your own practice as well. And, let me know below if this is what you incorporate into your sessions. Always simply saying, how does that resonate with you, right? So a post-session interview might be something like this. All right, Bruce, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the session, and just come on back whenever you're ready and take a seat and we'll begin. So it's like I'm talking to myself here as a session, right? So we'll come on back and just, whenever you're ready, just let me know how the session was. Wow, thanks, other Bruce. That was an amazing session. Yeah, I feel super relaxed, and it's really, I really feel nice and calm right now. It's really, really nice. Thank you very much. Oh, that's awesome to hear, first, Bruce. Thank you so much for that. It's, I wonder if anything came up or anything new happened for you in this session. Yeah, actually, second, Bruce, that's interesting that you mentioned that. I saw green, and, I felt this kind of tension in my heart. And so, there's a lot of kind of resistance here. All right, first, Reiki, Bruce, how does that work for you? What does that mean for you? What's going on there? How does that resonate with you? Have you seen it before? Has it been something that you've experienced before? No, it's never been an experience for me, actually. This is kind of the first time that I've ever experienced it. Okay, well, that's interesting. So when we come back and we have another session, we'll see how it continues to unfold and how it continues to develop, right? That's it. You see what I mean here? It's full stop on the person, no interpretation, but acknowledging that something has happened, acknowledging that there's potentially a door that has now opened for the individual, right? But not interpreting it, not opening it up to discussion, but always putting it to them. What does that mean to you? How did you experience it, right? You see, we're not interjecting our own story. We're not interjecting our direction. We're not approaching them as if I did something to the individual. We're not doing anything that is going to potentially open up a depth of trauma that the individual is not ready to see yet, right? Trauma-informed Reiki is simplified Reiki. It simply means that you are practicing Reiki from a neutral perspective. From that neutral perspective, we're not interpreting or judging or interfering with the trajectory of the client in any way whatsoever. I really would encourage all of you to look at your practice honestly and look at the post and pre-session discussions that you may have, right, as well. If we can have a trauma-informed approach, then that means when we are working with somebody and our hands are maybe on their head or just in the Reiki session and so on, they are neutral, right? Because if we are staying trauma-informed, we are staying neutral by definition, okay? Meaning we're not interjecting on their path. And so as they walk on their path, they'll feel the neutrality and they might take one step further into their own healing. And so with a trauma-informed approach in our meditation and holistic wellness practices, just remember, we're always trying to be neutral. No interpretation, judgment, belief, story, none of that is going into the person, right? So I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope that helps your practice. Let me know in the comments below how you found that video. And as always, thank you so much for the support here of my channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so. I release content every Sunday for the benefit of your Reiki and your wellness practices. If you'd like to learn more about me, head on over to my website, rootsoflife.org, where you can learn about my Reiki offerings and my holistic wellness services. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. I hope you found this video to be beneficial to your practice. As always, be well and In Gassho to all.